talk about that in a minute. It's a complex transaction, so there's a number of different players that you have to bring on board, and the attorney's job is to act as the quarterback for all these folks, so that you've got this team and someone is understanding where we're going with this thing and can put it all together. There's many due diligence steps that are required for this transaction. I'll talk about that in a minute too. It's not just negotiating the easement. There's other documents that go with this. The appraisal is one. The baseline documentation of the property's conservation values, which is required under the tax code, is the second. There might be some other things I'll mention in a minute. But all of those steps have to be completed if this, let's just call it a donation, is going to qualify under the tax code to receive the tax benefit. So there's certain hoops you have to jump through. You sign and record the conservation easement. If you're giving a stewardship cash gift in addition to that, you make that. And then after the transaction closes, there are some forms to push around in order to qualify again for the federal tax deduction. And then ongoingly, there's the question of monitoring and enforcement of the easement. So the land trust, some land trusts come annually. If nothing is happening on the property, they might, some land trusts I know do a 3-year schedule of monitoring. That's fine. The tax code doesn't require annual monitoring. If there's a lot of activity on the property, building and such, they might come more regularly. Okay? Go ahead, next slide. So the tax code requires, I'm just going to walk through this very quickly, because this is a creature of the tax code. It's called a qualified conservation contribution, if you look it up in the tax code. It's a real property interest that you're giving away. That's the conservation easement. It has to be exclusively for conservation purpose, so there has to be some conservation benefit of making this donation, and you have to give it to a qualified organization, such as the Land Trust Civil Conservancy. These are the conservation purposes. Usually it's to protect some sort of relatively natural habitat. Now this doesn't have to be like pristine, redwood forest or something. But it has to have some habitat associated with it. There's a wide variety of conservation values that fall under that one. Open space is another one. Scenic enjoyment. So anything along, 46, Highway 46 is a prime candidate, or any public road, or even a navigable river or stream. Okay? And what the tax code says is, it's better if there's some government policy that says, we want to protect this area, and that policy is quoted then in the conservation easement, because the easement is in support of that policy. That's what makes it a public benefit. So, in Hays County, when we were doing this transaction, we went to the county commissioners. We had to pass a policy to say, yeah, we like conservation easements, we want to protect the aquifer, and they also created a bond. They passed a bond for $30 million to fund the purchase of easements over the aquifer. So that government policy was quoted in this conservation easement that I mentioned before. And so it's not too difficult to find this. There's federal, state, local policies that are usually quoted as part of that open space conservation purpose. These are the two that get the most attention. But there's also outdoor recreation or education. Usually some public access is required though, because it's for the public. Okay, so maybe it's limited public. You're allowing people on your property, with a docent for a tour of a certain feature or something like that. Sometimes that is applicable. People are fine with that. Or historic preservation, that's another one. That doesn't necessarily require public access, but it might require public visibility. Go ahead. Qualified organization, usually that's a nonprofit conservation organization like the Civil Conservancy or other land trusts. Sometimes government agencies will hold easements as well. In Texas, that's not too popular. Okay? Usually people like to stick with the nonprofit, private sector, and the closer the land trust is to the home, usually that's the better, because this is a very relational thing. If you're dealing with the Nature Conservancy, they're a great outfit, that might be perfect for you, but they've got an international scope. So your little 200 acres that you have that means so much to you might not mean as much to them, because they've got properties all over the world, okay? So government's not too popular. So you've got to select the land trust, and here's what you look for. Your values fit with their values. It's just like a marriage, okay? To the extent that that occurs, that's a good fit. They have to have the capacity to do the deal. In other words, they got to know what they're doing. And most of the land trusts in Texas do just fine. Some are younger than others, some are less experienced than others, and they might require, a certain amount of education in order to do the deal. But I haven't really run into too many problems that way dealing with land trusts all across the state. They have to have long-term capacity because they're making a commitment to you that they're going to be around forever. They're going to monitor this thing annually usually, and they're going to enforce it. They're going to enforce the terms of the easement that you created. In other words, they're going to be the person that is, long after you're gone, they have this responsibility. And so they have to have some staying power. So look at the board of directors, look at who's involved, look at their financial situation. This is one of the reasons why it's good to make a cash gift of a stewardship endowment to the land trust, because you're protecting your investment when you give them that little bit of money to monitor and enforce the easement in the future. So that goes to their long-term capacity. Many land trusts offer resources to the landowner, technical resources in terms of managing property, that sort of thing. And so land trusts differ in their capacity to offer certain of those resources to the landowners. And costs. Each of these land trusts are very different. Most of these are volunteer, nonprofit organizations. They're not out to make a lot of money, but they have certain costs that they will build into the transaction. And the policies that the land trusts have are different. So sometimes if someone is very cost sensitive, we'll look at that level. Let me tell you, you get what you pay for. That doesn't mean paying tens of thousands of dollars to the Nature Conservancy is necessarily better than using a local land trust. But although I represent the landowners, I must say land trusts are very modest in what they ask for, okay, generally speaking. So you want to look at that level of cost to see if that fits your budget and what you're able to realize in terms of the tax savings from the donation. Excellent.
Has there been a case of the land trust going under yet? I mean,
No.
it's still so new.
No, I haven't. And the easements are designed so that sometimes in the easement you'll name a backup, but
Okay.
the easement will never fail for lack of a land trust, because if the land trust goes out of business and there's no one else around, you just go to a court and the court will appoint another land trust to step in.
Oh, okay.
You pretty much
Okay,
have the
that's
power
already
to say,
written in
well,
there.
I want to appoint X land trust, and the judge is going to say, fine. So I've never seen or heard of an easement failing for lack of a land trust because
Okay,
they go
so that stipulation is in there that another
Yes,
trust can pick it up
absolutely.
and will pick it up.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely. So in Texas, over 1 million acres of land have been protected. Think of that. That's pretty good. That number's growing daily. 49 land trusts. Here's the Texas Land Trust website. That's in your materials as well. If you want to go and research the different land trusts, take a look around on that website. It's a great resource for landowners. These are the folks that are generally involved. Chief among them is the appraiser. If you're going to make a donation, you have to substantiate the value of the conservation easement on your tax return. And to do that, if the gift is over $5,000, you have to have a qualified appraiser. Okay? Now, if the value of the gift is under $500, you don't have to submit the appraisal to the IRS. If the value of the gift is over $500,000, you have to submit a copy of the appraisal when you submit your income tax return, and you're taking the deduction the first year. Okay, so that appraisal has to be, as bulletproof as possible. This is the one area that the service, when they look at these transactions, usually looks very carefully. Okay, they look at the appraisal. So it's good to have someone who knows what the heck they're doing. And not every appraiser is qualified to do this kind of work. So generally the land trust will make a recommendation. Maybe they've got a short list of appraisers. The attorneys certainly know. Our firm works with probably half a dozen appraisers across the state. Those are the people that you want on your transaction team. A solid appraiser, number one.
I might add, ours was about 2.5 inches thick. That's literally how thick it is. And you're going to pay a substantial price for that. But it's like our appraiser told us, I've been doing this for a number of years and I've never been challenged yet. Yeah.
Okay. Baseline report. The tax code requires that when you make a donation that there's some documentation as to the